House Bill 1775, which bans the state from mandating diversity or sexual harassment trainings or teaching divisive concepts. I think that was like the other part of it, or that might have been the main part of it, is so the state wanted to ban teachers from teaching divisive concepts. And let me tell you, this debate was wild. So it is... Yeah, sorry, I may be getting them confused. This one is the one about teaching critical race theory. So you have basically the legislature passing laws to ban the teaching of certain concepts. And they couch it in this deal of where, like, it's like quasi-American exceptionalism, quasi, white guys can't get told they need to think differently about anything without getting just immediately upset and throwing the biggest temper tantrum imaginable. But then there's also this weird element of, like, thought policing that goes along with it, right? I mean, because I struggle to think of, like, a single other topic where you could make any justifiable argument that you can't teach this in school. Because they claim it's like indoctrination, right? Somehow if you merely teach about critical race theory or some of the racist underpinnings or sexist underpinnings of American history, I mean, like the fact that women couldn't vote in the original Constitution, or that we, codified slavery for...
Or that black people were 3/5 human?
Yeah, right. I mean, it's like, so we're allowed to teach maybe that happened, but we can't teach that, like, white people did it. I mean, it's just such a bullshit law. But it's like just the concept of not being able to teach an idea, and that's like something that we need to make laws about. It's really wild. I mean, like, I just can't think of...
It's like fiction wild.
Yeah.
Like, I just reread Order of the Phoenix, the Harry Potter book. Like, you can hate me for that, whatever. But, like, that's the whole, like, evil villain is like, you can't teach this, you can't teach this, you can't teach this. And, like, people like Lord Voldemort more than they like this lady. Like, it is, like, mythical levels of, like, restrictions. And, like, this is, like, to me, just, it goes, like, beyond the Scopes trial when it came to, evolution and things like that. Like, it just... as somebody who has been an educator, who has been in education my whole life, and whose parents who were educators, like I was the kid who was like, no, I'm not going to wear feathers in the Thanksgiving Day parade. Thanks very much. Like, I just can't even, like, I see how this concept, like, continues and what this manifests as. And, like, I remember having, like, sex education classes where they were like, I'm not going to show you how to put a condom on, but I will remove my sock and show you how to put a sock on my foot. So it's like real educators will get around these policies, but in a state where we're already underpaying our educators, like, there's not a lot of incentive for them except for the fact that they care. They care about what they're teaching their students. And so you get some people in places like Norman, probably in Oklahoma City, that are going to learn things. Then you get people in Poto. My best friend is a teacher in Poto, so sorry. But, like, who are probably not going to get that same level of education.
Yeah, well, and I can't get over the number of people. So I'm not from Oklahoma originally. I've been here like 16, 17 years. I grew up in the East Coast. I had Virginia history, which is rampant with a lot of bad shit. I feel like I learned most of it. I mean, they were a little too probably nice about Columbus and, Captain John Smith and Pocahontas and stuff like that. They definitely had their sort of whitewashed version of that. But we very much learned that, like, white people did really bad shit to the Native Americans. Like, It wasn't like, I left Virginia history being like, yeah, white people, we just, like, sat down and had Thanksgiving and everything was great. Like, I mean, we learned Trail of Tears. We learned, like, things were bad. I can't get over the number of Oklahomans I meet. They're like, yeah, we didn't learn about the Tulsa Race Massacre, or we didn't learn about...
I learned about that in art class.
Yeah.
I did a watercolor painting of a noose against a burning Tulsa city.
Yeah. I mean,
in what world is that okay?
Yeah, it's like, I definitely learned about atrocities in my history classes on the East Coast.
And
so
it's like, I highly recommend this book. It's called Lies My Teacher Told Me, and it's very interesting. It takes 10 high school textbooks from the 80s, and it compares them to 10 high school textbooks from like the 2000s. And it literally is like, look at all this wrong shit. Look at what it used to be. Look at how it's still not okay. And, you know, like he studies all these books and like how Texas labeled slaves as workers. Like they weren't called enslaved individuals. It's like, oh, the workers, you know? And it's like, there's so many ways that people will try to like whitewash history, because it all goes back to like this idea of American hubris and the pride that we have, which of course is something else we're going to talk about today. Just this like joy to be an American and what like American values are. But especially in a place like Oklahoma that has such a rich indigenous history. And we need to make it very clear that a lot of that indigenous history comes from like horrible mass migration, forced migration, and extermination policies.
Right.
You know, it's these people weren't always here. The Cherokee were not always in Oklahoma. The Cherokee are indigenous to Georgia. And so it's like we need to celebrate them. We need to have more land recognition. But it's like, this isn't like Oklahoma was this beautiful place that all of these nations got together and blah 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 blah. Like there's so many more complicated factors, and it's just, you know, it's just atrocious.
Yeah. So anyway, I pulled up the language because the reason I was getting confused was because this bill actually does both things I was talking about. So no enrolled student of an institution of higher education within the Oklahoma State system of higher education shall be required to engage in any form of mandatory gender or sexual diversity training or counseling, provided voluntary counseling shall not be prohibited. Any orientation or requirement that presents any form of race or sex stereotyping or bias on the basis of race shall be prohibited. Literally banning talking about it. Like, that's just what's the weirdest thing to me. And like, the thing is like, there will be ubiquitous agreement that like the guy who called the Norman girls basketball team the N-word on a hot mic is a bad dude. That like hardly anybody, I would say, guess you can't say nobody, but like hardly anybody feels bad for that guy. It got universal condemnation, but like we can't sit folks down and say, hey, like, if you think this is okay, like that's a problem, or hey, how do we kind of root this out of our society because it's a bad thing? I mean, it's totally bizarre to me.
Like I would have been the smart ass student who'd be like, my teacher says something I don't like, and be like, excuse me, you can't teach that. Sorry, did you not just see that? I consider that gender-based learning and diverse instruction. So no,
you have violated section.
Yeah, I'd be like, this is the rules. You thought these would help you. Now I'm just gonna flash that in your face.
Yeah, and then the weirdest one is like this whole thing about policing teachers. I mean, just like. And it's like a bunch of topics. I mean, it's not even just, I mean, it's thought policing. Like, it's like you can't teach that there's like moral good, or that you can't, I mean, I don't even, and they try to spin it, and like you can listen to the debate. I don't think it's necessarily super helpful, especially the Republican side of it, obviously. But it's like they try to spin it as like, no, it's you guys that are the problem because you want to talk about racism and all this stuff. And it's just sort of like, are you doing this on purpose? I mean, I think they clearly are. I mean, these people aren't idiots. I mean, J.J. Humphrey is a troll. Nathan Dahm is a troll. All these other guys wish they had the guts to be trolls, but they're actually just polite, you know, closeted trolls. So I mean, you know, my deal is like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know where this is like. I don't know where this is coming from. Like, I don't know where the energy for this on the right comes from. Mm-hmm. And then it becomes like, sadly, like really upsetting for women, minorities, survivors of various forms of racial and sexual trauma to like have to be like, can we at least, like, we just want to talk about this. Like, all we're asking you is to be able to like make people a little uncomfortable and have a conversation about this. And like, you're not even letting us do that. Like, we just want to understand this.
Well, and you have to take into account that these conversations are uncomfortable, but
Sure.
having these conversations means that eventually it will become a more comfortable thing to discuss. The more we talk about the prevalence of sexual violence, of racial violence, and things like that within our country and our communities, the easier it comes for a woman to stand up and be like, that guy's an ass and raped me. But the less we talk about it, the less we educate people on what the consequences for these actions are, the services that can be provided for you if you are a victim of these or a survivor of these actions. Like, having these conversations makes your community a safer place. And it's like they just don't have any like understanding about that.
Yeah. And then just the historical inaccuracy of it all. I mean, like we mentioned earlier about the Constitution, but it's just like I don't know how you don't teach some version of white supremacy in American history. I mean, like this, like we had a racial caste system for hundreds of years. Like it wasn't like a thing that we just messed around with in 1776, and by the late 1790s we were like, yeah, keeping everyone segregated like this and a different caste system's bad. We're done with that. It's like it wasn't until the 1860s and the most bloodiest war we've ever fought that we even like did the bare minimum. And then you fast forward another 100 years of Jim Crow, and like anyway, we could go into a whole discussion about racism and how it continues today, but it's like, America has instituted racialized laws, regimes, structures that favor one group over the other. And
they
for a long time, right? And it still does. I always just go back to, let's forget it. Let's get this out of the abstract. Let's not talk about feelings and opinions about skin color and all this stuff. Let's just look at outcomes, right? It's like black home ownership is the same today as it was 40 years ago. Like we have, racialized outcomes in sentencing for the same crimes. We have racialized outcomes in, how we fund education. We have, you can literally find study after study after study that says like, there's really no other explanation here except we racialized this at some point and it's still kind of going on today. Sorry, like that's what we did. Like, I don't know what we should be teaching ourselves how to undo that or how to fix that and what that might look like, how we can prevent it from happening again in the future. This stuff, all this information is just readily available and we can just talk about it. Like,
yeah, anyway. There is a plethora of books out there, and if we want to do book club shows, I got you. But it's like there are so many things out there. It's not like the information's not there. It's not like people are not saying this is where this comes from, this is how we solve it. Those problems and those solutions are out there in so many different forms, in podcasts, in videos, in movies, in books, in academic books. Like there are so many people that are talking about this issue, and just like we saw in the legislator, like people are just walking out. Like people aren't listening.
I was going to say, sorry, Athena, I was going to say keep the troll because I wanted to respond to that. As long as he doesn't spew immediate anti-Semitism or starts dropping, the N-word or whatever, I'm okay to keep him for a few minutes because I want to address that. Like, I think I can like click on the message and see what it said. So like the one about couldn't that describe any culture? I think racism and sexism and all these things describe every culture. Especially every white culture. But like the deal is many countries mitigate for it, right? Like they acknowledge. Germany after World War II. They acknowledge that like we done fucked up. Like we made some really big mistakes, guys, and we need to do something about that. So And I'm not saying all these European countries are perfect or that they've figured it all out or that there isn't racism in Asian countries or wherever. Like obviously there's anti-blackness around a lot of the globe. But I feel like there are varying levels of how they address it. And objectively, I feel like you can say in many cases they address it better than us. Like maybe they still have disparities by on the basis of race, but they're a lot narrower than ours.
Well, and that brings in like what we were going to talk about with Rick Santorum and his comments. You know, that little speech that he gave is talking about
Yeah.
like how we haven't changed over time. Oh my goodness, these countries in Europe and Asia, they've changed over millennial. Guess what? That's kind of a good thing. Like, the reason that Britain is not under the feudal system anymore is an accomplishment. You know, France has gone through 5 different constitutions since Napoleon, and that is substantially better than the system that Napoleon set up. And, you know, it's like if a shark stops swimming, then it dies. And I truly felt that under Donald Trump, our democracy was on its deathbed. I'm not even 100% convinced that we are resuscitated enough to continue living, because we have to keep swimming forward. We have to keep moving, because these establishments that were built in 1776 and 1782, like they're not going to prevail forever. You know, it's like there's people tweeting being like, yeah, we can change because according to the Constitution, I'm not a real person, and looking at me, I'm personing. Like, there's just so many different things that need to be evolved, and we shouldn't look at that like a demeaning event. You know, you brought up Germany. Germans are not strong nationalists. That's how Hitler came to power in the brown shirts, is that they were like, look how good Germany is. This is what we're going to do. We are going to propel Germany. We are going to make it great again. And that is what led to that spiraling Third Reich. And so, like, I've known several like German exchange students who have came here, and they're like, your flags are everywhere. It's terrifying. Yeah. You know, like this big sense of national pride hides a lot of inequalities and damages. And it causes like a spiral of like fear in people who come from countries where it's like, no, you shouldn't have this much like gusto. You should have gusto for the people around you, for your community, but it shouldn't be like all hail the Stars and Stripes.
And so, like, you know, so the question that the person put in the chat was, so you think history class should demonize whites? I mean, you know, like, yes. I always find, yeah, I was going to say, like, my immediate sarcastic answer is always, like, 100% yes. Like, because it's like, I mean, who the fuck else did it? Like, was it some other group of, you know, people from Northern Europe that came over here and did all this shit? Like, I mean, I don't know. Like, if it was somebody else, like, fucking blame them. I don't know. But, yeah.
I have to say, like, I take the fact that I am trained as a historian very seriously. I know it can seem that like, oh, I plan parties and stuff like that, but I was a graduate student in the history department, and I learned so much. And those conversations were like, yeah, this really fucking sucks. And there are still people who are out in that world being like, well, there are still apologists for it. But if you look at the people of color in those situations, if you look at the queer people, they are saying like, this is wrong. This is where you can point the arrows to. This is where you can go from slave catchers to police officers to the KKK. Like, those lines are very clearly drawn.
Right.
And it's not like, and you know, this comes into play with like people saying like, we shouldn't celebrate Columbus Day. I agree with that. But we have to understand that like Columbus was a part of a breed of people, and all of those people are horrible. Right. You know, they came, you know, and back to the Rick Santorum speech, it's like, he's like, oh, they came here for religious freedom. John Smith, Christopher Columbus, and all of those people did not come here for that. They came to rape, kill, and pillage.
Right.
And so it's like, there's no truth to it.
Yeah, and even like Athena points out, it's like, you know, the definition of whiteness shifted over time, you know, because like at various points, I mean, the Irish, the Italians, the Polish, I mean, the various groups were considered not white until, you know, they needed to be considered white, you know? So it's like, I think there's I think there's a lot of ways to teach it where it's like less about, I mean, I just don't even know. I don't even know how you teach that stuff and demonize. I don't know. I don't even know how you teach it and demonize certain groups the way they think that it gets done. I mean, it's like we're teaching.
It's not
like
demonizing. It's repercussions.
Right.
Like it's not like we're making these things up. It's not like we're coming out and being like, these are like this. I mean, we are saying like, these are the sins and this is the atrocities. But I think every historian goes out and saying like, these people weren't just like born out of a perfect society. Andrew Jackson was a product of the place he grew up in the wars that he fought, and in the political economic sources that he was established in.
Right.
So it's not like teaching this like demonizes one person or one action. It's understanding that this is a cataclysmic cluster of people and societies that are reaffirming whiteness, that are reaffirming privilege on a constant daily basis.
So I wanted to pull up, so J.J. Humphrey just said both the KKK and BLM are terrorist groups while debating 1775. Rep. Goodwin and Nichols booed, Rep. Goodwin booed and Rep. Nichols said that's bullshit. I don't know do we want to play his comment? There's like a minute clip here.
No, okay. I don't. We have a lot of other stuff to talk about, but I will say, if you watch that clip, the only man that is allowed to speak like that in his "this is the God-chosen way" is John Lithgow telling the kids in Footloose they can't have a dance.
Yeah.
That is the only way I will accept that tone. That is the only way I will listen to a man beating a Bible that much.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, it's all just performative BS. Yeah. And then Rick Santorum, we birthed a nation from nothing. I mean, there was nothing here. I mean, yes, we have Native Americans, but candidly, there isn't much Native American culture in American culture. So again, I mean, it's just white dudes freestyling the craziest ahistorical genocidal shit, and just like, I mean, this is why we need this education. I mean, this is why you guys need to take these courses, because like you just shouldn't even say stuff like that. It's like, yeah, the reason there's no Native American culture is because you fucking eradicated it. Like, you murdered and wiped. I mean, you literally sent Native children to schools to force their culture out of them. You did forced adoptions. I mean, you did like stuff that is psychotic. I mean, anyway.
And it's also like ignorant to be like, oh, there's no Native American culture. As if you can compare the Algonquin to the people in the Northwest region, to the Cherokee, to the tribes. Apache. Like, there's so many different Native American cultures. So it's like reminds me of when people are like, oh, the Indian tongue. It's like, are you stupid? Like, there were vast amount of people. There were vast amount of cultures here. And yet we have constantly like looped them together and said, oh, well, you're all indigenous.
Get ready for Oklahoma City's attempt at that. The First Americans Museum's about to open. I think they've like really tried to rehab that. So I'm hoping it's well done. And I think actually the Chickasaws have come in and helped take it over. But the first iteration of that and the boondoggle that it became very much kind of originated out of this like kind of bullshit of what Santorum's saying here is like, they're all just the same and we don't know any history about them.
Well, and like,
too stupid to figure it out.
Not to like dive more into history, but it's like when you think of King Philip's War and you think about these like huge moments in American history where it's like, well, these tribes were stupid because they fought with the French or they fought with these people and they fought against this tribe. It's like, no, because nobody, in my research, I would say no nation, no tribe thought that the next door tribe was just like them. They thought of them the same way they thought as Europeans. Like, they were the enemies just the same. They were friends just the same. Like, there was not a cohesive unit of like, oh, we're all this. And there's still not. Like, there are still people who are like, well, I'm Choctaw and you're Cherokee and blah, 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 blah. Like, there's still that division, as long as with like AIM bringing people together with the American Indian movement. But like, just to lump those people together, like, hurts my soul, but like my soul's pretty crushed, so it's fine.
Yeah, and of course he's giving this like to what Young America's Foundation, so it's like some youth conservative probably project where it's just you're just re-perpetuating the same dumb ahistorical psycho stuff. It's just awful. Like it's just, these guys need to just go away. I mean, once you lose your Senate seat and can't manage a presidential run, like just go away. Go back to spending daddy's money or whatever the hell you do with your life.
Or fathering his 7 children.
Yeah, literally anything else.